Good evening, my name is Tony Jones, and you are tuned in to The Coalition, where we discuss all sides of local, regional, and national news, politics, and current events. With me in studio is my old pals, my co-hosts, the Ed McMahons to my Johnny Carsons, plural. The P.O. taxpayer is here. P.O., good evening.
Good evening, Tony.
Christine is here. Chris, good evening.
Good evening, Tony.
Another exciting week is upon us here at The Coalition, online at coalitionradio.us. And like normal, like usual on this program, the P.O. taxpayer is all in a tizzy.
Well, I've sort of discovered Twitter this week.
Welcome to 2001.
and I seem to have, in my own unique way, brought the level of conversation down even a couple of steps lower than in Twitter. First of all, a shout-out goes to my new friend, and you can't see the air quotes here, Ian Donis from Rhode Island Public Radio. And actually, my new real friend, Bill Rapley, from JAR10, who has chosen to follow me. I'm not sure why. I guess he wants to see the Twitter equivalent of a driver's ed film. But, it's opened my eyes to a brave new world. Tony, do you know what last night was?
I don't.
Last night... And without Twitter, I wouldn't have been part of this. Last night was homemade pizza night at the Gina Raimondi house.
Why wasn't I invited?
Oddly, I'm probably never going to get invited. Just talk about political pandering. We touched on this last week, and yet the subject won't go away. You've got arguably a brilliant woman, really at the top of her game, intellectually, academically, roams the halls of the State House as general treasurer for her state, pandering to the electorate with pictures of her children making homemade pizza strips. It brings to mind the immortal saying, really the apotheosis of the 1950s, "Gee, Mrs. Cleaver, you look wonderful." I mean, Chris, I got to ask you, is this the orange is the new black of postpartum feminism here in America?
I think it's probably in response to polling that they've done quietly. My guess is that they've done some polling and discovered that Ms. Raimondo is considered bright, but that there's a human warmth element missing. And they're trying to make up for it with that. Think about the way the Romney family was portrayed.
True.
My guess is that it's not so much of a post-feminism statement as it is, people think you're cold.
Soften the edges.
Yeah, soften the edges.
Oh. But it's just so,
But you do make a good point, I think, whether you intended to make this point or not. It's harder
or whether
for
you
women
intended to make a good point.
Yeah. Well, I think it's harder for women, excuse me, everyone out there, it's harder for women to tread the line between softening the edges and coming across as more human without falling into the June Cleaver trap.
Look like a Stedford wife.
Right.
To me, it's appalling on two levels. Number one, I voted for her the last time around, and I voted her because of where she stood on the issues. Plain and simple. It was the first time I'd voted for a Democrat, and, well, no, her and Frank Caprio, the only two Democrats I've voted for in this millennium. So when I look at the level of competence, and I just see a blatant attempt to pander and dumb down, I find it personally insulting. On top of that, there's the whole notion, oft debated since the Clintonistas were in power, of the involvement of children in a campaign. And at what point, and I hope it doesn't happen, I have children, and I would never want to see this happen to anyone's family, but at what point in time, if you involve your family in your public life, does your public life become fodder for your family? And at a certain point, then, has she dropped down the barriers? If she's elected governor in 2 or 3 years, if there's an incident or a question, are her children then open season because she's chosen to campaign based on their existence?
Well, we've seen that happen at the national level, absolutely. Every politician running for president trots the adorable children out. And the closer they get to the brass ring or the gold ring or whatever you'd like to call it, the more their children get scrutinized.
Well, but I think there's been a counter trend against that. I mean,
I would hope so.
I mean, and I would hope so too, because it really has no place in the public discourse.
It seems to go in waves.
I mean,
at some point it reaches a level that everybody becomes appalled by, and then the press or the politicians or the public will say enough is enough, and then it dies down for a while,
Well,
and then it gradually creeps up again.
We didn't see much of Chelsea Clinton. We saw very little of the Bush.
We didn't see much of Chelsea, but there was an awful lot of backtalk on.
Right, and it was
she was going through her awkward years while
right.
her dad was president, and people made fun of her mercilessly for it.
Right, and it was rightly, and as someone who's right of center, I rightly crushed it because it had no place.
Right, and you can empathize because you have daughters.
I have daughters.
Yeah.
And I actually, it's sort of a reverse emphasis because would you feel about if you were a teenage daughter growing up with an awkward father?
Right.
Now, Pio, let me ask you a question. As a man of generous proportions, were you enticed by said pizza?
No, because it didn't. If I'm doing homemade pizzas, it's got to be English muffins, and you can't go with the cheap ones. Okay, so
Pio wants a layer of bacon on top.
No, English muffins are not. That's not real pizza.
No, but if you're doing homemade pizza,
that's a toaster pizza.
That's
that you
bachelor
do as a bachelor.
pizza.
Exactly.
all right. Well,
I used to make toaster pizzas
knowing
before
what
I learned how to cook.
Knowing what little I do of Ms. Raimundi, I'll never keep me from generalizing her about her. But it strikes me that she's probably using herb encrusted bread with artisanal cheeses and vine ripened sun dried tomatoes.
And Pio's making Nutella
I'm sorry, that
pizza.
sounds delicious. That sounds delicious.
And more than I can afford.
Ketchup and Velveeta on your English muffin pizza.
Well, speaking of the elite.
I'm hungry now.
There you go. Speaking of the elite, this week we were finally treated, and boy was it a treat, to the image, the deer in the headlights ridden image of none other than Clay Pell, who lovingly consented to interviews from two members of Rhode Island's Glitterati media. Wow. Talk about being incredibly underwhelmed. There was a great series of pieces on Channel 10. It's on WJR's website. And Rhode Island Public Radio did about a 9-minute piece. Mr. Rapley did a piece for about 20 minutes. And, it's almost an unfair comparison because he had the benefit of TV. He also had the benefit of a more extended format. I believe he did it as part of the Sunday's Newsmakers program. But, and to both their credits, they did ask the one hard question, which is, how do you decide one day to wake up and say, yeah, I'm going to be the governor? There doesn't simply seem to be any there. His first contention is that he's going to do the listening tour, the now fabled listening tour, to get a handle on what the issues facing our Rhode Island are. And the question I would ask to my two co-hosts is, if you're running for governor, shouldn't you have figured that already? And shouldn't have a plan already in place to run with?
Well, I would like to think that he has some idea already of what many of the issues are, and that saying that he's going on a listening tour really is just a way to say, I realize there may be things I haven't considered, as opposed to walking in as a blank slate.
Some set of his executive qualifications appears to be the fact that he ran a foreign language program for the State Department, I believe, and that he was an executive officer in the Coast Guard for a few years. And then we're then subjected to, depending on the format, 10 to 20 minutes worth of emotional feel-good statements about wanting people to fulfill their human potential, and baseball, apple pie, and yes, I'm for finding a cure for cancer.
So apparently he's gone through some coaching.
Oh, my God. He just
on political bromides.
He seems so coached. Rhode Island's in desperate shape. And what's appalling to me is that, with the exception of Mr. Block, and I don't even know if I'm going to vote for Mr. Block yet, but with the exception of Mr. Block, these guys who are running, and gals, seem so over-consulted. This is the political equivalent of Rebecca Black singing Friday, It's Friday. I mean, they have been auto-tuned to death. I haven't heard a substantive statement out of any of them other than feel good, I'm going to get better lunches and I'm going to get rid of homework, high school-like promises.
I would love to hear the phrase listening tour retired.
Okay.
Come up with another way to say I'm going to go out and hear what people have to say. But listening tour, that the phrasing to me always sounds a little condescending.
Next time I get accused of spending too much time in bar rooms at home, I'm going to say, honey, I'm on a listening tour.
There you go.
Well, the time to do the listening tour, I'm okay with listening tours. But do it a year ago. All right, how many months are we outside of the election? We were just treated to our esteemed governor's final, thank God, State of the State speech. Another underwhelming event.
I categorically refuse to watch State of the State, State of the Union, State of the Small Town.
It's a gigantic promise section filled with cliches, non sequiturs, generalizations, feel-good pablum.
Yeah, there was a time when the State of the Union address was actually a serious business-type address delivered by the president to Congress about, and I'm talking 200 years ago. It was their job to say, here's what's going on, and to have discussions about it. And, in the day of TV, it's basically become an opportunity for whoever the sitting president is to lead a rah-rah speech.
To pontificate.
Yeah, and, I don't like watching them when I dislike the president, but I don't like watching them when I like the president either, because I don't need to be sitting through yet another political rally. Well,
and to close with a kind of mumbled quote from Taylor Swift.
Nice.
Although the tweet of the week was basically, I would have thought the Taylor Swift quote would have been something effective. I'm gone forever. Wish I could have claimed credit for that one.
Well, I have to admit, and just like you notoriously admitted that you voted for Gina Raimondo, and people on the internet are calling PO taxpayer an embarrassment to libertarians and a big, cuddly, progressive teddy bear, I personally like Clay Pell as far as the fact that anybody outside of the Rhode Island bureaucracy is a step in the right direction. So you have a choice of Clay Pell or Todd Giroux, because if you're like me, if you're an unaffiliated voter, you're not going to bother voting in the Republican primary because yawn.
Exactly.
Although I do have to say, though, if you want to have some input into which, getting the best candidates to the final round, there would be some value to registering as a Republican and voting in that primary.
But if you're an independent, you get to cherry pick.
That's true.
Right. And given...
Well, you register on the spot, you vote, and then you deregister.
And then you disaffiliate right when you're done.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And given Alan
Which a lot of people don't realize.
No, I do it every year.
A lot of people think that they're locked into a primary, and they're not. If there's a primary that's lame, which is the exact point I've been making to a lot of people out on my listening tour, is that any of these candidates need to reach out to alternative media, and they need to reach out to the unaffiliates. The people watching NBC 10 News Conference and listening to NPR have already decided who they're going to vote for. They're the political junkies like us. The real people are going to make the difference this time around, which is interesting.
Right. So actually getting those people interested in your campaign and getting them to show up for the primary is very important.
And if it makes you feel that one certain person makes them feel a little bit better, not only did I vote for Gina Raimondo, but in the presidential primary, I voted for Hillary Clinton.
Oh, man. Let the PO taxpayer hate mail continue.
Well, on that note, nice segue. This week, we are uniquely thrilled to have a special guest in our studio today, because he really comprises, I think, a unique blend of charity, of caring, of giving, and yet at the same time, independence and libertarian thought. And we're going to focus on this a little bit today. I've got Andy Posner. Now, if you're a fan of GoLocalProv.com, as we are here, Andy was listed as one of the 14 people to watch in 2014. He's executive director of the Capital Good Fund. A little background. He has his master's in arts and environmental studies from Brown University. He was a 2013 Amex Emerging Innovator. Let me read you a quote that he puts out. We all put out sort of our own personal quotes and mission statements. He believes he's a ferociously pragmatic idealist who believes that creative business models, advanced data analytics, and a mix of market and mission-centered focus can lead to dramatic social change. Explain that for me.
Well, so first of all, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure. And, when I look at what we do, and those of you that have heard of microfinance know that, it's reached about 250 million people around the world, and the founder of the movement, Muhammad Yunus, won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006. And the idea of microfinance is that people who are living in poverty or low income have a lot of the skills they need to succeed. They have certain barriers. And so you can use financial services, so small loans, financial counseling, to help unlock those barriers. So it's really a hand up, not a handout. So what we like to say at Capital Good Fund is that we're what happens when Silicon Valley crashes into a soup kitchen, because there is a market failure where poverty is concerned. So you can't just rely on unfettered markets to solve that problem. If it could have, it would have. At the same time, you can't only rely on charity, because if charity could have solved the problem, it would have. And so we're trying to straddle those two areas in our work.
You bring up a great point. One of our favorite quotes here is something called the bigotry of diminished expectations. And so unlike a significant part of what we'll call the charity enterprise, the charity industry, it's clear that you no longer assume in your business model that people, in a sense, are helpless, that people don't have free will and don't have the determination and don't have the skills to advance themselves. So let's talk about the organization and give people sort of a framework. There was some specific legislation that enabled, on a level here in the United States, from the Department of the Treasury, organizations to engage in microfinance. So tell us a little bit about that first.
Sure. So what you're referring to is the Community Development Financial Institution, or CDFI, program out of the United States Treasury, which was actually started by Bill Clinton, who actually, when he was governor of Arkansas, helped bring one of the first microfinance initiatives to the United States. And basically what CDFIs do is use financial services to solve social problems. So there are banks that are CDFIs, credit unions, nonprofits like us, housing development corporations. And so let me give you just a little background about what we do. So I started the organization in 2009, actually while I was getting my master's at Brown. And really what compelled me to do it was that the recession hit, and suddenly a lack of access to equitable credit was very clearly a need that was not being filled by the market. And actually my expertise is in financing mechanisms for green energy. And so when I heard about microfinance, I realized that it's just a way to unlock the potential of poor people. So our mission is to provide financial services that create pathways out of poverty, and we do that across 3 product and service lines. We do one-on-one financial and health coaching. We do small loans for personal purposes, things like a security deposit on an apartment, applying for U.S. citizenship, and also energy efficiency upgrades in your home. And then we also do free tax preparation through an IRS program, which we're actually kicking off next week. And our growth has been tremendous, especially for a nonprofit. We now have 16 employees, 120 volunteers, and 3 offices in 2 states. And we're turning 5 in February, so I'm really proud of the growth.
That's terrific.
Thank you.
And you just opened up a branch up in Woonsocket, correct?
Yeah, so United Way funded us to open a micro branch right on Main Street in Woonsocket, and we're doing a payday loan alternative program, which we can delve into the payday loan issue if you'd like.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, in 2001, the state legislature in Rhode Island created a special carve-out in the laws that allows payday lenders to charge 260% APR. For everyone else, the usury limit is 36. They lobbied really hard for that, and it's big business. I think it was in 2011 they did about $70 million of business in Rhode Island. And these are mostly companies that are based in the South. And it just sucks money out of the households, low-income households. And that's money that's not going into the economy, that's not being saved, that's increasing dependence on public benefits. So we've been part of a coalition for now, we're entering year 4, to try to reform that law to bring the usury rate back down to 36%. Well, we haven't had success so far. So we said, okay, let's show that we can offer an equitable alternative, because one of the arguments is that if you get rid of these, well, where are people going to go? It's a bit of a straw man argument, and I can explain why. But so we're now doing loans of $300 to $500. They're a 1-year term. We charge a 30% interest rate and a 4% closing fee, and we report the loans to the credit bureau, so our borrowers build that asset of good credit.
Let me point out for a second, too, for all of those who believe that the Democratic Party in Rhode Island, not our friends in the progressive movement, but the standard bearers of the Democratic Party are, forward-thinking, progressive, reform-minded individuals. Isn't it the former Speaker of the House who's been hired as a lobbyist to represent that payday loan industry?
You're correct, and it is my understanding that that's one of the large reasons that this has been dragged out so long.
Right. So the Democratic Party of Rhode Island, which is for the people, by the people, and of the people, doesn't mind screwing the people if the right person is actually being paid as a lobbyist.
And what's interesting is that the coalition that we're a part of consists of, I think it's 50 or 60 organizations. We're talking about faith-based, United Way, nonprofits, political leaders, including Treasurer Raimondo, the governor. And the people that are in favor of the reform are those that don't have a financial stake in the industry.
Right.
The only people arguing for it is the industry.
And yet somehow they're able to prevail.
Correct.
Okay. Now, again, let's refresh for a second, because we're going to go into a little bit of the history now of the microloan movement. For all of those people who assume that this is quote-unquote charity, all my libertarian friends who are, ears are still burning, the ability for a non-governmental organization to promote lending, which is relatively unrestricted, in an amount that's appropriate to free enterprise, and at the same time allow people to capitalistic instincts to overtake the normal enslaving mentality of welfare, is the ultimate libertarian argument. It's always been my firm belief that capitalism is the methodology from which people fully realize their one's human's potential. People are given the opportunity to invest directly in the future of other folks whose successes then breed innovation. Their financial success that stems from innovation then allows for reinvestment into other folks' potential innovation. And that's the beauty of this program, isn't it?
It is. It assumes the best in people. It says, you are going to be able to pay back this loan. You're going to be able to succeed with this loan. You just need a little bit of help. So in addition to the loan, we also provide this financial and health coaching to help people navigate what is a complicated financial system. What I would like to point out, though, is the extent to which the market has failed in this country, the poor. Mm-hmm. And the numbers are shocking, and I swear this is real data. 1 out of 3 Americans live at 150% of the poverty line or below. 1 out of 3 in the wealthiest nation in the world. And the federal poverty line is already shockingly low. So for one person, it's about $12,000. So that's what we're facing here. We're also facing a $100 billion a year industry that provides them predatory financial services. So we're talking about the payday lenders, the check cashers, the refund anticipation lenders, basically that whole cabal that you see when you go into a low-income neighborhood that has the bright neon signs trying to tempt you.
Right.
Well, and the quick title loan business, the payday loan business, is not some just nefarious back alley operation. Some of these organizations are owned by the largest financial institutions in the country, correct?
And many of them are publicly traded. I mean, it is big business.
And I'd also point out that they're called payday loans for a reason. They're preying basically on the working poor.
They are.
These aren't people waiting for a handout in most cases. These are people who are doing their best to overcome their situation and to get ahead.
And most of the
they're
poor,
being dragged back.
Most of the poor in this country are the working poor. And the thing with the payday lending is that it lures you in with a false promise, which is that you need a quick amount of cash, we're going to provide that to you, and you just pay it back in 2 or 4 weeks, and you're on your way. But here's the thing. When you charge 260%, 2 weeks of interest at that rate is nothing. The business model depends upon the people who take out the loan rolling it over, borrowing it over and over.
Not being able to pay it back.
Exactly. So the average person rolls it over 7 to 9 times, and they end up paying hundreds, if not thousands of dollars of interest. So it becomes this debt nightmare.
Right. So this is basically, in the case of a major bank that secretly owns these payday loan companies, it's a way for them to grossly prey on a particular segment of the population.
Exactly. And it's operating in a space where the legislation allows it, but probably shouldn't, right?
Right.
And here's the thing. It's a great business to be in if you want to be in it. I mean, when you charge that interest rate, you don't have to spend time thinking about, can this person afford the loan?
Right, because it doesn't matter.
Right. And the advertisement isn't hard because who doesn't want to solve a problem with just quick cash? I forgot the exact number, but if you start one of these stores, it doesn't take very long to become profitable. So they're still growing like wildfire around the country.
What this and some of the other reasons, Rhode Island recently received a C grade in consumer protection. Maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, well, so certainly the payday loan issue, I mean, $70 million of revenue in a state this small, I think it's about 20,000 individuals in a given year take out payday loans.
Oof.
And again, we're a small state. The other thing about debt is that when the economy's terrible, people turn to debt because what else are they going to do?
Right.
And so in my mind, we got that grade because there's so much unemployment, and there's also underemployment, which I think is almost as bad because now you have people who are not really paid attention to because people say, oh, they're employed, but they're not making enough to make ends meet. So what happens when the car breaks down? They have to put it on a credit card.
Right.
And a lot of people say, well, what about personal responsibility? And believe me, we believe in responsibility because people need to pay us back. But at the end of the day, if it's between charging on your card or not putting food on the table, you're going to charge to your card.
Right. You're going to do what you have to do.
Exactly.
And hope that next week or the week after things will start to turn around.
And something I think people should understand is that it's not just that they're falling behind, that they have bad credit. Bad credit's not good, but it's the day-to-day just stress. It has physiological, psychological impacts that we see on our clients. And that's one of the reasons why we actually have a health coaching component to our financial coaching. Because so many people, we were doing a budget with them, and then they mentioned that they had panic attacks or depression or domestic violence, and we realized that we had an opportunity to connect those two things. Because our philosophy is that at the end of the day, everything is financial, right? Find me something that doesn't connect to finances. And so we try to be like the hub around which other services revolve, whether it's job training or domestic violence support or legal services or government programs or even just employment. We try to serve as that anchor that provides the support for a person to get out of poverty.
As we go into our break, one of the things that we'd like you to take a look at, if you have an opportunity, on coalitionradio.us, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this after the break. We've posted a video about the Grameen Bank and what I guess you refer to him as the father of microfinance.
Yes,
and that would be Mohammed Yunus. Again, as you mentioned, the 2006 winner of the Nobel Peace Prize. Interesting that an economist would win the Peace Prize and not the Economics Prize, but really had a profound effect. Talks a little bit about the history and, where can we learn more about your organization?
So our website is capitalgoodfund.org, and we're also on Twitter at CGFund and also on Facebook.
And it is halfway through the show, which means we're going to take a quick break. Don't forget to check out facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on Twitter at Coalition_radio, and of course, the aforementioned, the almighty coalitionradio.us. We'll be back in a bit.
Radio show, live events, and so much more. Check them out online at 13folds.com. That's the number 13, FOLDS.com.
My name is Angel Rach. I'm a mother of 2 teenage children, and I fought all the way to the Supreme Court for the right to use the medicine that saved my life. I've been permanently disabled for 10 years, with an inoperable brain tumor, wasting syndrome, and several other serious conditions. For 4 years, I was in a wheelchair, in so much pain, I couldn't even hug my kids. The hardest part was looking in their eyes and seeing how much they were suffering because of my medical condition. The medicine that gave me my life back and gave my kids their mom back was cannabis, also known as medical marijuana. With medical marijuana, I can walk, maintain my weight, and I can be a mom. Without it, my doctors believe that I would die. To learn more about medical marijuana, contact Marijuana Policy Project at 1-877-JOIN-MPP or on the web at mpp.org.
Hey, everybody, it's Tony Jones. You know, when I'm not here yakking about politics, I spin records. That's right. If you like good old-fashioned rock and roll radio the way God intended it to be, then tune in to The Tony Jones Show. The information's online at tonyjones.org. That's tonyjones.org.
Heading out on the town tonight? Be sure to log on to providencenightout.com and don't forget to check their cell phone app. That's providencenightout.com.
Tony Jones here. You are tuned in to the Coalition online at coalitionradio.us. My co-hosts, as always, Christine, Chris, and P.O. Taxpayer. P.O., good evening.
Chris, are you channeling your inner Kathleen Turner tonight?
Yeah, that's it. Let's just say I've taken my relationship with Fisherman's Friend to a whole new level this weekend.
Everybody has the plague. Andy had the plague last week. I had it. I thought I had the plague, and then I slept for 10 hours, and I woke up and I felt fine, so I may have just been exhausted.
That could be.
One time I thought I had mono, but it turns out I was just really bored.
Well, Tony, I think it's because of our uniquely healthy lifestyles. We've both been clinically dead for 10 years.
Pass me another bacon martini, please.
Well, we're happy to be back and have Andy Posner as our guest. We started to, before the break, talk a little bit about the history of microfinance and microlending, and really, I guess it's for lack of a better term, it started in one of the poorest spots on earth. Anyone who's of a certain age remembers the insurrection and the political revolt surrounding Bangladesh and its rather brutal separation from the Indian subcontinent. Tell us a little bit about an economist and how he started literally in a slum one day, loaning money out to an individual because he had his hallelujah moment.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story, and it's inspired myself and tens of thousands of others. So Dr. Muhammad Yunus actually has his PhD from Vanderbilt University, and he went back to Chittagong in Bangladesh to teach economics. And this was just after the war, and there was a terrible famine. And he said, look, I can't keep teaching these concepts when people are starving on the streets. So he went out, I guess you could call this a type of listening tour, but he went out to try to understand why were people starving. And what he found was that there were women, very industrious, had their microenterprises, were selling baskets, selling fish, selling milk. And he couldn't understand why it was that they were selling things and weren't able to bring enough money home to feed their family. And what he found out was that the fundamental problem was that for them to get the capital they needed, for instance, to buy bamboo to make a bamboo stool, they had to go to a money lender because they didn't have the capital. And the money lender would charge them so much interest that by the time they were done with their sale and with the cost of the bamboo, they had only pennies left. So he went to the banks and he said, why don't you lend to these people? And the banks laughed him out of the room, of course, right? That they had no concept of that these were illiterate women and they couldn't put up collateral. So he decided to make loans himself. And I think the story is he started out with $40 of loans to 17 women. They all paid it off, and suddenly they weren't dependent on the money lender. They had enough capital left over to reinvest in the business and grow it just like any other business.
Now, there's an amusing anecdote about the whole notion of who he lent to. His earliest customers, if you will, were and are primarily women, aren't they?
To this day, 97% of the borrowers are women. Many of them are illiterate, but he has 8 million borrowers throughout the country of Bangladesh. And Grameen Bank is a bank now. They take deposits, they make loans, you can put your savings in there and earn interest. And I actually spent 3 weeks in Bangladesh in January of 2010, and I got to tell you, Walmart would be impressed at the efficiency with which they operate, except that they operate in the poorest regions of the world where there's dirt roads and monsoons and malaria, and it just boggles the mind, and it works.
But culturally, he found that women were far more reliable, far more responsible, far more focused, and far more entrepreneurial, which for that part of the world, you combine that type of, and that's a sea change in outlook. Also, sort of in direct conflict with the Islamic lending laws, he managed to persevere. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of personal courage in a story like that.
Right. So, yeah, Islamic lending laws don't allow you to charge interest. And not only that, but 30 years ago, women weren't allowed to leave the house unaccompanied by a man. And now you go into Bangladesh, and every day in the middle of the village, there's a group of women, unattended by men, handling money. And there's been a sea change in the empowerment of women in the country, in no small part thanks to him and his business model and his bank.
Literally changing the world. I mean, ultimately, this is an example of where capitalism and the free market, if left relatively unfettered, can do good, can change lives. Now, let's flash forward to Rhode Island. You're involved in your own effort in terms of fundraising. You've got a kind of a unique take on what you call your IPO.
Correct. So I should point out that microfinance in the developing world has actually become profitable to the point that there was an IPO by one entity in India, and there was a revolt by the borrowers. And Muhammad Yunus has spoken out against this because he says they've become the new money lenders. But the point is that it's possible to do microlending internationally and not need any grant money. It's very difficult in the U.S. because our costs are higher, right? Salaries are higher. The loan sizes we do are bigger, and it's just more challenging. So we operate on a mix of grant money and money that we earn off our loans and other things. So to try to raise the money we need to get big enough to make enough loans to not need any more grants, we're trying to come up with a unique approach. So let's just step back and let's pretend we were Amazon, okay? We start out, we raise a couple $1 million in equity from investors. We operate at a loss for several years because we make investments we need. Eventually, we're big enough that we can turn a profit, and now we're Amazon. Okay, translate that to us. We need several $1 million to be big enough to make investments we need to grow. But unlike Amazon, we're trying to get donations. And it's hard to get money out of foundations. There's a ton of charities. We all get pitched for money. And so we decided to do this thing called a nonprofit IPO. And it stands for Immediate Public Opportunity to End Poverty. And it's an interesting take on fundraising. So to be clear, we're not giving away shares in a company because we can't as a nonprofit. Howsoever, for every $25 you donate, you get what we call a social innovation share. So you get a stock certificate, you get a tax write-off, but you also get a vote to elect a board member of the organization. So you get a real stake in our work and our mission. And so we're trying to engage people in a non-traditional way so we can raise the money we need to grow.
What mechanism and where can folks learn more about this?
We're using a crowdfunding site called Indiegogo. There's sort of two, Kickstarter and Indiegogo. The best way to access it is just to go to our website, which is capitalgoodfund.org, and you'll see off the main page a link, and you can buy a share and really get invested in our work. I should also mention that there's a non-philanthropic way to invest in us, which is to literally invest in us. So people can lend us as little as $500. That goes right into our loan pool, which we then lend out to low-income families. And we pay 1% to 3% on the loan that's made to us. And so that's a sustainable model. It uses free market forces. And we're looking to raise more loan capital right now because our loan volume is very high and our repayment rates are phenomenal.
What is that percentage right now? Have you run into any issues getting repaid?
Well, so we made some bad loans over the first 3 years. Mm-hmm. Over the past year and a half, we're looking at 93 to 96% repayment rates, and it keeps climbing. We've gotten really good at lending to low-income families.
What are some of the what's some of the paperwork? What's the typical loan submission just like with your organization?
You mean to invest in a loan or for us to make a loan?
For if folks show up at your doorstep, mm-hmm. They're in tough times right now. They may need to, they may be in crisis energy-wise. They may need a new computer. We're going to go into some of the products you have, but
sure.
But in general, they walk into your office and say, "I want to borrow money." What happens?
Sure. And so the first thing we want people to know is that we have no minimum credit score requirement, no minimum income requirement, and we don't require any collateral. Typically, people will do a loan application with us over the phone It's completely free. It takes 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the complexity of your situation. We then have a formula for evaluating the application, and then we'll give you a decision within 48 business hours, 48 hours. And then if you're pre-approved for the loan, you'll just provide us with proof of your income and your residence and your identity. And then you'll come in, sign a loan agreement, which is very simple, and you'll get your check. And then borrowers actually make payments through an automatic withdrawal from their bank account. So it's really easy. They don't have to think about it. We just pull it out every month and then report to the credit bureaus, and you build your credit score.
It looks like you've got a couple of unique partnerships going here on different products. Let's first talk about what you call your double green loan. Now, that's actually, you're doing that in conjunction with National Grid?
Yeah, so they have a program called the Heat Loan. We're the only nonprofit partner. There are some banks and credit unions that participate. And basically, it allows us to make loans of $500 to $5,000 at 0% interest to the borrower for pre-approved energy efficiency upgrades. And then National Grid actually guarantees us an interest rate, so we can still make money on the loans. And they've been very popular, especially this time of year. And for anyone that wants to sign up for that, the first step is call National Grid and ask for your free energy audit, to which any ratepayer is entitled. They'll then come in, and after I've done the evaluation, they'll make some recommendations about investments you can make. So insulation in the walls, light bulbs, things like that. And then they'll let you know about the price and then financing options. So we're the financing option that you can go to pay for those upgrades.
Okay. The next area you focus on is what you call the digital divide, in terms of trying to bridge the gap between people who have access to tech and people who don't, connectivity.
Correct.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So we look at all the disadvantages a low-income family faces. One of the big ones is lack of access to the technology that a lot of us take for granted. And I'm a big fan of libraries, but you can imagine that it's inconvenient if you want to do job searching, apply for public benefits, check your email, do your online banking, file your taxes. Having to run to the library every time is inconvenient. Why don't more people have computers? Because it costs money. When you make $1,000 a month, a $400 purchase is a big deal.
Not to mention access to the internet.
Correct. And that's been a little harder for us to deal with, because that's an ongoing monthly expense. So we provide the loan to buy a computer or a tablet or even a smartphone, and then we work with the client to build a budget to be able to afford internet service. And what we find is once people have that internet service, they'll kind of shift things around to make sure they can afford that, because that's always a big priority. Access to information is huge for people.
Well, it's interesting, too, because there are so many societal assumptions, if you will, both on the primary educational level that we'll just go home and go onto the internet and find this. And what do you say to children then who are in a school district like Woonsocket, where, never mind internet, even basic books are an issue?
Right. And you can't overstate the extent to which that's a disadvantage over non-poor kids or non-poor adults. All the things we do online that they can't do.
You almost create a technological ghetto that people are almost permanently consigned to in the absence of that type of assistance.
You do. And Muhammad Yunus says that access to financial services should be a human right, and I believe that access to information as well should be a human right.
You talk about something called political exclusion on your website. Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. When we were getting started, we did some focus groups, and we heard from a lot of people that they were eligible for U.S. citizenship. So they're legal permanent residents, been here, more than 5 years. But it costs $680 to the federal government to apply for citizenship, plus about $200 if you go to a social service agency like the Catholic Diocese or Dorcas International Institute. Well, that's $880. That's hard. And I actually looked, there was a recent study by the Pew Charitable Trust. And they found that of the people in the United States that are eligible for citizenship, 17% don't do it because of the cost. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people. And think about the benefit of having motivated entrepreneurial people becoming citizens and being able to participate in our political process. So we provide a loan for that. And I have to say, those loans have performed better than any other loan we've done, because these are people that want to start out on the right foot, that are so motivated. I've gone to the swearing-in ceremonies, and we can all become jaded about the political process, but there you see people who still believe in it, and they just reinvigorate the process.
Well, as a country right now, there's a certain segment that is very negative about people who here are illegally, and that's an area for a separate debate. It should go beyond saying, though, that we should support those people who are actually following the legal process. And you're right. In that role, traditionally, people who have followed legal immigration process have provided us with an infusion of human capital that's continually provided a level of resurgence for this country. And that's been going on for hundreds of years.
We wouldn't be America without it. But there are other things. So, for instance, there's a wonderful program that for even if you're here illegally but you're a victim of domestic violence, there's a pathway to legalization.